Hey everyone, I'm Alicia Esposito, and today I'm thrilled to have Charlene Li joining me for this Retail Reset conversation. If you don't know Charlene, she is the founder and senior fellow at Altimeter, which is a profit company. She's an author and an expert on disruption, which I know is a word on top of everyone's list right now. Most of all, she is focused on helping leaders learn how they can better adapt and respond to disruptive forces. Her latest book, The Disruption Mindset, gets to the heart of why some organizations transform in times like these and why others fail. So with that, Charlene, really thrilled to have you on with us today. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
So when it comes to disruption, obviously you've literally written the book on it, and disruption is definitely not a new term in the retail world, but I'm curious to hear your take on this current situation that we're in and essentially how it compares to all of the other forces that businesses as a whole have had to respond to or overcome, just based on through the context of the research that you've done and the work that you've done with businesses. How are things faring right now?
Well, things are really tough for retailers. Again, there's nothing in any sort of memory that comes close to this. The recession back in 2008, the dot-com bust, for example, in 2000, 2001. But those were sort of slow-moving disruptions that were headed your way. So there was time for retailers, more time than they had, which is basically days this time, where everything just completely shifted. That said, I think retail, given this time of when it happened, we have alternatives like online, like curbside, like delivery that has smoothed that disruption to some degree. So the digital transformation that so many retailers have been going down the path of has really helped them a lot. And our research in terms of digital transformation has shown, and especially for retail, they have completely accelerated that. While overall spending in IT might have decreased, the spending overall in digital transformation and giving optionality has tremendously increased.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So if you were to look at retail comparatively to other industries, like I know before we started recording, we were talking about education. Real estate is another industry that a lot of people are questioning the future of, or what do future business models look like? So would you say that retail, in terms of their ability to adapt and respond to the current situation, new developments, and changes, would you say retail is faring pretty well comparatively?
Well, I think compared to, for example, travel or hospitality, it's doing fairly well. You've been able to continue with the vast majority of the business. And in many ways, the needs haven't gone away. I mean, people still need to buy things, but the channel and the way that you buy them has shifted. And the other thing is many people, especially, for example, in apparel, household goods, people are just doing without. They're just waiting for a better time to happen. And you've got the pressures also of the recession happening here too, people losing their jobs. So that all is having an impact. But the actual physical aspect of retail I think is fundamentally changing, because we have these concerns around our safety and sanitation. And until we can really feel comfortable, until the health issues are addressed, that part of the business is still going to be really severely impacted. And it clearly impacts other ones. I think education is impacted even more so, because education cannot actually continue in the way it has in the past.
Right.
The actual delivery of education. You can't go into houses and see them. You can't, and commercial real estate has also been severely impacted because people are working at home. So different types of disruptions, but what I've been impressed by is how well retailers have responded to this disruption. Amazingly well. The ability to pivot and that resilience in the face of so much change happening so quickly.
Yeah, I love that. So to that end, you noted some of the consumer-facing factors or influences that are impacting their spending. Of course, some are navigating layoffs, furloughs, but also more long-term recession is kind of a looming thing that we're all kind of waiting to see the impact of that. So I want to go back to a concept that you talk about in your latest book around how businesses need to be thinking about their future customer in order to develop their plan forward, their business strategies, et cetera. What do you think retailers need to know now about their future customer that will help them, even though they've been doing a good job of pivoting and adjusting? Is there anything that comes to mind that they may need to be aware of or be prepared to respond to right now in light of all of these factors?
Right. So there are a couple more short-term things
Okay.
associated with reopening, for example, where you're going to make more of your store available to a small number of people. The needs around safety and sanitation, having visible sanitation stations, being very, very clear that especially if you're trying on clothing or shows, how you're sanitizing, what those processes are. Even having sanitation managers with vests on or some sort of identification that gives people reassurances that you as a retailer are really thinking through the safety and security of the customers who are coming through the door. Because people will see things aren't functioning, they will just turn right around and go to another competitor, just go back to online because it just doesn't feel safe yet. So those are the short-term considerations. But I think also the longer-term considerations is this is not going to change for quite a while. This may be an opportunity to think about how do we shift more of that buying preference and setting, that sort of consideration process online and even all the way through purchase. How is that changing? How are consumers really changing the way that they're thinking about even purchasing these goods? Do they even need them anymore? The demand curves have fundamentally changed because people's behaviors have changed. Do I need as much makeup? Do I need as many clothes? Do I need to have the household things? Do I need more of them because I'm using so many more things? So things have fundamentally changed, and assuming that things have not changed and your customers are going to come back to you just as you reopen, I think is a big mistake.
Yeah. No, there are some very interesting nuances there. I recall when we were in the early stages of stay-at-home orders, and we started to see that supply chain really build up on the retailer side, even Amazon having a lot of issues with fulfillment. And I recall seeing a lot of my peers as shoppers say, I've been thinking twice about my buying decisions. Do I really need this right now? Do I need to leverage Prime? Do I even need to visit Amazon right now, for example? So looking at that through the lens of this may not come as quickly as I expected to, but also through the lens of the workforce, right? Like the people who are fulfilling the order. So it's very interesting to see that type of shift in consumers' minds, that they were a bit more intentional and thoughtful about their purchase decisions, especially in a time where we can essentially tap a screen and we get what we need, which kind of ties us to the business response, right? How they can respond short term and also long term, and be successful, right? And I know a lot of our viewers are thinking about that right now. And this ties back to what you call the big gulp moment, which I love. We saw some retailers take that big gulp moment, take big leaps, take some chances, and they were successful, which was fantastic, to get curbside up and running swiftly, for example. So I'm curious, will we be seeing more big gulp moments from retailers in the future? Because I know for many years we've said a lot of executives are risk averse. They're more hesitant to embrace that fail fast mentality. But are we seeing a pivot here, for lack of a better word?
Absolutely. I think this is a time when people are rethinking everything. And the retailers are thinking everything from simplifying the supply chain, as you mentioned, to slimming down the number of SKUs that they have because there's just too many. We just don't have the demand. And frankly, consumers are going to be happy just to get something. So do we need to have 15 different versions of something versus having 5? So simplification, focusing on that excellent experience rather than diversity of choice. And then also, I think there's a question about how do we actually not just digitize the front end of what the consumers are doing, but also on the back end, taking advantage of the fact that we have so much more data now. And do we actually start having consortiums of retailers in adjacent industries where you're swapping and sharing that data? Because you want to counter some of the media companies like Facebook and Google and the information they have to have better information yourselves across retailers. And then finally, do you actually go asset light? Do you finally say, I don't need all of this floor space? I actually can just have a very small footprint. It's primarily fulfillment. I can do this curbside. I can redistribute my assets into smaller locations so people don't have to drive halfway across the city to do curbside. So there's different ways of thinking about how I actually literally deliver my goods and services to people in a much more agile way.
That's fascinating. I really like that concept of new ways for the industry or adjacent industries to share insight and information. I was actually going to ask you next around the notion of more agile ways of collaborating internally. So do you expect to see an evolution in terms of what collaboration means for the industry as a whole? I guess looking at it through the lens of adapting and being agile to new consumer behaviors, right? Because you noted that this is going to be a long-term thing, and I'm sure there will be changes and shifts as we go through the process, from the consumer's mindset. So do you think this is going to be a long-term thing as well? Like we are going to be adopting more agile ways of working?
Yes, and I think in particular, the relationship with employees, frontline employees who actually deal with and work with those very valuable customers. I talk about that future customer, this elusive, future customer, like who are they? What do they look like? If you have a model of who they looks like, it can't stay in the inner sanctum of market research and product development. It needs to be at the very front lines so that when somebody actually sees somebody who represents the needs of a future customer, they can send send up the signal flare and say to people, look, I got one here. This is what they said. This is what they did. This is what they're thinking. This is how they're feeling. We're going to have a lot more empathy for that future customer because we know that these things are changing constantly now. And so you need to have a really, really close connection to these future customers. And it can't be done on a survey every other month. Even surveys on a weekly basis won't give you the intelligence that the front lines can give you. That requires a fundamental shift and change in the relationship between the retailer and the employees. We're talking about people not just delivering at the front lines. We're asking them to be the radar, the extrasensory perception skills of the organization to be able to understand how customer needs are changing.
Yeah. And that's, I think, a huge shift in terms of how the store employee may perceive their job, right? I mean, historically, a lot of store associates, it's part-time work or seasonal work. But I know even before this current situation had hit, there have been conversations around how do we cultivate this community of employees, even beyond the store, where people are truly engaged in the brand mission, engaged in their consumers. And I guess this ties to my next question for you around some of the principles and frameworks that you've provided, especially in your latest book, to help leaders cultivate this community, kind of transform the way everyone thinks and collaborates. I'm wondering if you can share some key takeaways or imperatives for the executive leaders watching right now that are saying, I do want to encourage more agility, encourage this greater connection to our front line, but I'm not quite sure how to do this successfully.
Right. When I think about culture and changing culture, it seems like this amorphous, really vague thing. How do I actually shape it and move it? And my research found that culture is simply made up of two things: the beliefs that the organization has, the formal ones, and also the informal ones that just rise up over time. And then the behaviors that are influenced by those beliefs. And the two work hand in hand. And when you have beliefs and behaviors that result in the kind of actions that actually move your organization forward and serve those customers well, then things are aligned. But the reality is most organizations don't have good beliefs, a good understanding of what beliefs are working for them and aren't. There are three beliefs that disruptive organizations have. They are openness, because openness leads to transparency and accountability. It's agency. And it goes back to, do your employees think like as if they were owners? And this is not about empowering them, because that says they're waiting for somebody to give them power. Do they see themselves as owners of that experience, of the business themselves? And what do you do to encourage that belief? And then finally, a bias for action. And that is underscores a belief that your customers are moving faster and further away from you. So you have to go as fast as you can. This is not about being perfect. And if you have a strong relationship with them, even if you make a mistake, they will forgive you because they know you're trying to do the best thing for them. These are the beliefs that organizations that can drive exponential growth really almost seemingly spin on a dime. And it is because they do this all the time. They live in a disruptive world. They believe the world is being constantly disrupted, not by external forces, but by themselves. Because they do this because it's the right thing to do for the customers. And they drive themselves and constantly say, how can we do things better?
Yeah, I love that. And I like that you set that distinction between empowerment and this full-on culture change, right? Because there is always that barrier between them and leadership. And that was a great breakdown. So thank you, Charlene. So to that end, would love to dig into the connection to transformation. I know you touched on digital transformation a little bit earlier in our conversation, and that, of course, is kind of rising to the top now as retailers try to find better ways of responding to evolving customer needs. So are there any new rules or best practices for making transformation a reality in these times, and is there a connecting point between the cultural principles that you just shared and successful transformation?
Sure. Yeah, I do believe that transformation, if you think about business transformation or digital transformation, whatever it is, transformation is really hard. It's not this incremental change. It's usually something very ambitious, and we're saying very clearly, we're here today and we need to be there tomorrow. And unless who has an aspirational ambition about why we're doing this, it's connected to the why, connected back to our purpose and our mission, then it's going to fall short. No one's going to go on that journey. So it's an acknowledgement that the transformation is needed, being very clear about where we're going, why we're going. And then the culture is simply the engine that determines how fast you're going to go down that road. But you need a road, you need a roadmap to say, this is where we're going. And that's the power of that future customer, because that can give you a focus that's not just based on, well, we need to make more money. No, we're here to serve our customers. We're here to really serve a need that they have in their lives. And we're going to do that in the best way possible. And that's going to drive our disruption. That's going to drive all of this transformation.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think especially in this current situation, a lot of leaders may be panicked a little bit of like, we need to keep things running. We need to like still be present, like locking down completely is not an option. But we did, or at least I personally kind of saw and felt that little bit of a shift, and we need to be there for our customers. And I hope that's something that sticks from a cultural standpoint, from a strategic standpoint, because I think that putting the customer at the center of those decisions is just so critical. We've talked a lot about the strategies, the best practices, the fundamentals really for success moving forward. So I think it's only appropriate if I ask you about success stories, since you always have a pulse on what other companies are doing, what other leaders are doing. Are there any executives that you think really rose to the occasion, did some powerful things in light of COVID-19? I mean, it can even be across industries if it's relevant.
Right. I was really, again, this happened at the very beginning, but the CEO of Marriott, Arne Sorensen, had to make a really, really tough decision, because clearly when you're a hotel chain and travel has stopped and no one's leaving their home, it's going to have a huge impact on your business. So they made an announcement that they were going to lay off people, furlough people, just basically shut down operations across many, many of their properties. And he didn't just put it out in a press release. He didn't just give it out. He went online, made a video, a really heartfelt video. And the last minute of it is worth watching. It's a lesson in leadership, because the personal concern, the sense that this was a turning point. And you could hear that he was concerned about every single one of his employees. What it was, the business, like, yeah, we'll take care of the business, but I'm really concerned about what's going to happen to our employees. We hope and pray that they're going to be safe. And you can't prepare for that. This is something you live every single day. You don't do this at the last minute. And so I think that the most important thing to take away from the learnings here is that you prepare yourself for these leadership moments by living those leadership values and practicing that every single day. Arnie Sorensen didn't start caring about the employees when he had to lay them off. He cared about them every single day, which is why that was so authentic. And so as we go through these transformations, how we show up as leaders becomes all the more important, especially when things are not going to be a steady recovery. It's going to be a total roller coaster. So how are you showing up every day to deal with the small crises, the small transformations? How are you leading and encouraging other people to step up, be leaders themselves, even if they don't have a title? How are you building agency and that level of trust so that when the crisis comes, you can tap into that relationship capital and be able to lead people in a way that they need to be led?
I love that. How are you showing up every day? I think that's a good question for anyone, not just the people at the top, right? What are you doing to, drive your business forward, to drive yourself forward, right? Because I feel like at the end of the day, especially in this current situation, some days it's hard to really focus and make an impact or feel like you're making an impact, right? I mean, regardless of the roles, you have and you follow every day. So I love that as a core takeaway. But we're at the top of our time together, Charlene. However, before I let you go, I do want to kind of wrap up by zeroing in on this even more interesting time that we're heading into now. So we're still navigating this current situation, right? The ebbs and flows, the peaks and valleys of some areas reopening, some reopening and reclosing. And at the same time, retailers are preparing for the most critical time of the year, which is holiday. I don't even know what's going to be happening with back to school, but this Q3, Q4 period is essential from a business standpoint. So do you have any parting thoughts, words of wisdom or advice to help them navigate the business imperatives, like what they need to do from a performance standpoint, but also some of these really crucial components that we talked about today, the culture, the, giving your people agency, showing up every day and doing intentional work? I mean, how can they balance all of this?
I think the biggest investment you can make right now is in your people. We always talk about people being our most important asset, and yet we don't really take care of it. We don't invest in it. We don't nurture it. We don't measure how well that asset is doing. And this is the time when you can align people, make sure they understand what that strategy is, make sure they understand who that future customer is, and then make sure that they understand what metrics are most important. This is the time to make sure all those things are there, because we have no idea what's going to hit us over the next couple of months, not even next week. And this is where we have to build that resilience into the organization as deeply and as widely as possible. Because when you give the command as a leader that we're going to turn the battleship, how confident are you that everyone is going to turn? That takes training. That takes an understanding of what the options are, what the potential commands could be. And it also takes a lot of, from you as a leader, having confidence in people and they feeling the confidence that we can weather the storm together. So that's what I would be focused on. It's not any specific tactic. You will figure out the tactics along the way. In fact, your front lines will tell you what the tactics are. You will develop these things together. But the key thing is you develop it together.
So powerful. This has been wonderful, Charlene. Thank you so much again for taking the time out to speak with me today. Where can folks go to get more insights from you? Because I'm sure everyone watching this is like, I need to get more of this. So what's the best way for folks to get more
you can
insights?
Find me at charleneli.com, just my name. And I'm also frequently posting on places like LinkedIn. I do twice a week live broadcasts on there and across all the different social channels. So if there's a social channel, I'm probably on it.
All right, excellent. And I'm going to do a plug too. This is her latest book. If you don't have it yet, go buy it. I've been reading it. It's fantastic, super valuable. Charlene, thank you so much for taking the time out to join me today.
Okay, thank you so much for having me.
And thanks everyone out there for watching. Take care now.